Okay, let's be honest. Catholics can be just a little bit creepy sometimes. For example, did you know that right here behind me in this chapel is part of the body of a dead person? It's true. In the altar, right behind me, there's an altar stone, and inside that altar stone is the relic of a saint. And this is a relic of a saint is usually something small, like a fragment of bone. And that's true of pretty much every Catholic church you've ever been in. In the altar, there will be a relic to a saint. And I wonder how many people come here and they worship and they pray and they don't realize that that's there, that there is part of a dead body, in this same church where we're praying. This is part of the tradition that we as Catholics have of venerating the relics of saints. And sometimes this can be a real big deal, especially if it's a really important saint, a major saint, like one of the apostles, for example. The burial place where these saints' bodies are entombed can become major pilgrimage sites. So like the primary example of this might be Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where the body of St. James is buried, right? St. James being Santiago in Spanish. That's where his relics are. And so for centuries, this has been a site of major pilgrimage where people come from all over the world. And they traditionally walk there, right? Hundreds of miles on the way to Santiago de Compostela to make that pilgrimage. And sometimes our veneration of the relics of saints is such that we actually take the saints out on tour. I'm thinking in the past couple of years, there have been a couple of major saints that have kind of made their way through our diocese, in the Diocese of Charlotte. We had the relics of St. Maria Goretti, and we had the relics of St. Padre Pio come visit some churches in our diocese. And people just came. I mean, hundreds of people, thousands of people would come just for the opportunity to pray in the presence of these saints' corporeal remains for just a few moments. And this isn't just saints that we revere their corporeal remains. Even with non-sainted deceased people, we still treat their bodies, their physical remains, with great reverence and respect. We have rules about how we treat the remains of departed people. For example, in the funeral rites of the Catholic Church, there's a strong preference towards having a physical body present during the funeral rites. And there's a strong preference towards having the whole body entire as opposed to a cremation. Cremation used to actually be illegal in the Catholic Church. We didn't allow it, but we do allow it now. But even when the body is cremated, we insist on treating the cremains with the same respect and reverence that we would an intact body. And what that means is they all have to be held together. You're not allowed to separate them out in different places. They have to be buried either in the ground or entombed in a columbarium somewhere. You can't put the ashes, on a shelf in the closet. You can't scatter them in the ocean or scatter them in a park somewhere. They have to be kept together. We insist on this. And sometimes the way that we inter bodies can even go to extremes. There's one church in Rome I'm thinking of. It's called the Bone Church or the Bone Crypt. I believe it's called the Church of the Conception of the Capuchins. And it's where the remains of the Capuchin friars in that order are interred. And they actually use the bones of the Capuchin friars to build and to decorate the interior of the church. And so you go into this church and everything is skulls and femurs and all of this. And to an outside observer, it looks grotesque. But to someone who, is more steeped in the Catholic tradition, it can be beautiful. Why do we do this? Why do we do these creepy sorts of things? We want to have the physical remains of our departed loved ones available to us, either in a grave somewhere or in a tomb, in a columbarium, or even someplace like the Bone Church in Rome, to where we can go and visit and give us a place to pray for them and to remember them by. The reason why we venerate the physical remains of those who have died, whether it be the relics of a saint or the physical remains of some of our departed loved ones, is, ironically enough, not because we're obsessed with death, but it's because of the hope that we have in the resurrection. It's because of our hope in the resurrection. You see, we as human beings are body and soul composites. That's what it means to be a human, to be a creature that has both body and soul. And death is when that body and that soul separate, right? That's what death is. So we're no longer one whole human being, but our two halves have been split in two. And when the soul leaves the body decays. But the soul lives on. But the soul by itself doesn't constitute a human being. The soul needs a body. And so our faith, our hope, is that at the end of time, we will be reunited with resurrected bodies so that we can exist for all eternity as God created us as human beings. And this hope in the resurrection is what our readings are about this Sunday. We see this in our first reading in 2 Maccabees, a story that we're told of the 7 brothers who would rather meet death than violate God's law. And the reason that they were willing to do that is because of the hope that they had in the resurrection. They had hope that the God who gave them their physical bodies would be able to restore those bodies to them if they remained faithful to his law. And this was before Christ. This was before the resurrection, right? So we who live today share that same hope, but we have an even greater reason for that hope because we live on the other side of that central point of history, the resurrection of Christ. We have seen Christ enter into the tomb, enter into death, and then rise again from the grave. The first fruits of the resurrection have already been realized. So we have a firm reason to hope in that promise. And so this is why Catholics have all these traditions around, dead people and their body parts and the corporeal remains of people that seem to the outside world to be a little bit creepy, right? Or maybe even a little grotesque. The reason we do these things is because of the hope that we have, that these physical remains, even if they've been corrupted and decayed and disintegrated into dust, that the God who created those bodies to begin with, the God who first formed Adam out of clay, out of the dust of the earth, and then breathed life into him, will be able to reform these bodies for us, to reform them, to give us new life in his resurrection. Praise be Jesus Christ.